Hey, it's Scott James from Intuitive Musician, and in this video we're going to dive deep into David Bowie's personality type. If you like this sort of thing and you want to see more of it, you can go to intuitivemusician.com/tips. David Bowie was a fascinating character. He was complex, he was intellectual, he was outrageous, he was ambiguous, and he was dangerous. He was a shy and troubled kid who created a character that captured the world's imagination, and he never looked back. He was an innovator and an icon. So was he an ISFP or an INTJ? Now this video is going to be fairly advanced, so I'm going to assume that you have an understanding of the cognitive functions. The cognitive functions are like the real building blocks of Myers-Briggs. It's a level deeper than just the I, the S, the F, the P, and the I, the N, the T, and the J. This is where the good stuff is. So if you want to get caught up to speed, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, you can go to intuitivemusician.com/functions. In the meantime, I still think it will be interesting for you to watch through this video and just kind of play along. I think it'll still be very interesting and worth watching, and then you can go back later and learn more about the terminology. David Bowie is most commonly typed as ISFP. Now, I wasn't really a Bowie fan when he was alive, and from a distance, ISFP certainly seemed plausible to me. But when he died, my girlfriend at the time, who was a Bowie fan, started a discussion about his type and pulled up an interview for me to watch. And as I started watching it and listening to him, I was like, wait a minute, this is not an ISFP, this is an INTJ. And I actually became much more interested in Bowie and his music as I started to dig into his personality type. I felt like I started to get him for the first time. Now, I know INTJ is not a popular opinion, so before you scream blasphemy and leave me an angry comment, hear me out. I think I might be able to change your mind. Now, I'm going to break this video into 4 parts. In part 1, I'm going to talk about what specifically I saw in the interview I mentioned that immediately led me to believe that he was INTJ and not ISFP, and get into some additional points to build my case. In part 2, I'm going to talk about why so many INTJ musicians are mistyped. In part 3, I'm going to look at how an INTJ became Ziggy Stardust. And in part 4, I'm going to show you an INTJ musician I know personally who I think will help you make the connection. I'm going to use Prince several times as an ISFP counterexample throughout this video because I think he's such a great example of an ISFP musician and his traits are so pronounced. So let's take a look at this interview I was talking about. This is from the BBC in 1999. There are 2 things he says at the beginning that are strong clues. So let's roll it.
As a writer, and I really had the idea in my head that people would do my songs. And I was not a natural performer. I didn't feel at ease on stage, ever.
His original vision as an artist was that other people would perform his music. This would be unusual for an ISFP. ISFPs are very personally connected to their music. Almost all ISFPs write almost all of their own songs, and I can't think of any who write professionally but don't perform. It could certainly happen, and I'm guessing there's got to be some, but it would be odd to me that this was how an ISFP envisioned their career. Compare that to Prince. Prince was offered a record deal when he was 15 years old, but he held out for 3 years because he refused to sign a deal unless they let him produce the album and play all the instruments. Now that sounds like an ISFP to me. I've had a few ISFP clients as a web designer who come to mind. 2 of them are high-profile musicians, and the other is a film producer. One thing they have in common? They want to control everything, and they're not especially concerned with practicality. Sometimes this works. It works if you're Prince. In other cases, it can be an issue. ISFPs can become successful despite this tendency if they have the talent to overcome it. But either way, with very few exceptions, they don't like to relinquish control of their creations. This is because of FI primary. Their work comes from a deeply personal place, and they're not going to just readily allow someone to just do their thing and run with it. They're going to want to know that the final work is an expression that resonates with their personal truth. The other thing Bowie said is that he's not a natural performer and he's never felt at ease on stage. Again, this is something that would sound very odd to me coming from an ISFP. ISFPs are stereotypically the type who are shy in real life but come alive on stage.
How many years ago did you make these demos and then have offers on them? And why would you turn it down?
They wouldn't let me produce myself.
ISFPs are typically very right-brained, so expressing their ideas verbally might be something that they're not especially confident in. ISFPs do, however, tend to have a natural physical intelligence and tend to have more confidence as performers than INTJs. For example, my friend invited me to come down and see an artist he was working with perform his first show. He's an ISFP named Bira. Notice how this guy just knows how to move his body. This isn't him coming off of a 6-month world tour. This is his first show. David Bowie did not have that kind of bodily intelligence. By all accounts, he was a hedonist and he enjoyed his extroverted sensing function, but it was his inferior process, one that he used without a lot of control or grace. Now let's go back to Prince for a minute. FI primaries start from a place of personal values and emotional resonance. Notice this when Prince talks about how he viewed the internet on Arsenio Hall in 2014. He's talking about justice and fairness and how this affects artists personally, and he's appealing to other people's sense of respect and fairness.
You seem to have somewhat of a love-hate battle going on with technology. I know you haven't always loved the internet. How are you seeing progress right now with all of that? Can you use it to your advantage?
It's a double-edged sword. You know, a lot of artists aren't getting paid full scale for their art, and the internet, because of downloading and things like that, is kind of like a black hole, and it's hard to audit, it's hard to get accounting, and it's not that it's just about the money, but it's about justice and fairness. And when people say that they love you and they respect you, but at the same time take, 80% of your earnings, then expect you to fix your own communities, and they'll probably edit all of this out. But then it gets, that's the sharp part of the sword, and we're at the wrong end of it right now. So eventually, with courageous people going out there and actually saying something and standing up for it, I think we'll get some balance.
Now let's get Bowie's perspective on the internet. Keep in mind, this interview was from 1999. Here's what to look for. INTJs spend a lot of time thinking about the future, because the more they can suss out where things are headed, the more at ease they feel. This is just fundamental to how they relate to the world. Notice how well developed Bowie's ideas about the future were. He's not talking off the top of his head. These are things he's spent a lot of time thinking about. Also, notice how he naturally shifts perspectives. NI detaches from the first-person perspective. It manipulates perspective in order to mine insights, and it predicts patterns into the future. He's shifting perspectives constantly, from the artist to the audience to himself to communities and even through time. This is the smoking gun. This is slam dunk NI primary.
It's still produced signs of horror from people if you said, yeah, I'm in rock and roll. It was, my goodness. Now it's a career opportunity. And the internet is now, carries the flag of being subversive and possibly rebellious and chaotic, nihilistic, and oh yes it is. Forget about the Microsoft element. The monopolies do not have a monopoly. Maybe on programs.
What you like about what you like about it is the fact that anyone can say anything or do anything.
From my stand, from where I am, because of by virtue of the fact that I am a pop singer and writer, I really embrace the idea that there's a new demystification process going on between the artist and the audience. I think when you look back at, say, this last decade, there hasn't really been one single entity, artist or group, that have personified or become the brand name for the 90s. It was starting to fade a little in the 80s, and in the 70s there were still definite artists, in the 60s there were the Beatles and the Hendrix, and in the 50s there was Presley. Now it's subgroups and genres. It's hip-hop, it's girl power. It's a communal kind of thing. It's about the community. It's becoming more and more about the audience, because the point of having somebody who led the forces has disappeared, because the vocabulary of rock is too well known. It's a currency that is not it's not devoid of meaning anymore, but it's certainly only a conveyor of information now. It's not a conveyor of rebellion. And the internet has taken on that, as I say. And so I find that a terribly exciting area. So from my standpoint, being an artist, I like to see what the new construction is between artist and audience. There is a breakdown. There's a personified, I think, by the rave culture of the last few years, where the audience is at least as important as whoever is playing at the rave. It's almost like the artist is to accompany the audience and what the audience are doing. And that feeling is very much permeating music and permeating the internet.
But what is it specifically about the internet? I mean, anybody can say anything. And it all adds up to what? I mean, it seems to me there's nothing cohesive about it in the way that there was something cohesive about the youth revolution in music.
Oh, but absolutely. And because I think that we, at the time, up until at least the mid-70s, really felt that we were still living under the, in the guise of a single and absolute created society, where there were known truths and known lies, and there was no kind of duplicity or pluralism about the things that we believed in. That started to break down rapidly in the 70s, and the idea of a duality in the way that we live. There are always 2, 3, 4, 5 sides to every question. That the singularity disappeared. And that, I believe, has produced such a medium as the internet, which absolutely establishes and shows us that we are living in total fragmentation.
You don't think that some of the claims being made for it are hugely exaggerated? I mean, when the telephone was invented, people made amazing claims.
I know the
NGs,
president,
for example.
The president at the time when it was first invented, he was outrageous. He said he foresaw the day in the future when every town in America would have a telephone. Now how dare he claim like that? Absolute bullshit. No, you see, I don't agree. I think the internet, I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
It's just a tool, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No. No, it's an alien life form.
What do you think, I mean, when you think then about the
Is
future
there life
of it,
on Mars? Yes, it's just landed here.
but it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico. It's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about. But it's happening in every form. It's happening in visual art. The breakthroughs at the early part of the century with people like Duchamp, who were so prescient in what they were doing and putting down. The idea that the piece of work is not finished until the audience come to it and add their own interpretation, and what the piece of art is about is the grey space in the middle. That grey space in the middle is what the 21st century is going to be about.
Notice how when the interviewer makes a face like he's not really buying what he's saying, Bowie doesn't back down. He knew what he was talking about, and he was right. This was him in his wheelhouse. His ideas were well formed. Now think back and compare Bowie's cerebral, conceptual, forward-thinking point of view about the internet to Prince's perspective, which was coming from FI. Now let's talk about David's constant reinvention. I think people look at artists like Lady Gaga and ISFP and see how she constantly changes her look and explores different avenues as an artist, and they naturally draw parallels to Bowie. There's an important distinction to make, though. ISFPs will approach this kind of evolution as being an ongoing expression of their authentic personal truth from one moment to the next. Bowie's characters were something a little different. They were inventions. They were new perspectives for him to adopt. They weren't him. In a minute, I'm going to roll a clip of him talking about Ziggy Stardust in the third person. An ISFP is not likely to refer to themselves at any previous point in their career from the third person perspective, with the notable exception of Prince, who is known to refer to himself in the third person in real time. But anyhow, the reason an ISFP doesn't talk about past versions of themselves in the third person is because in their mind, they were always themselves. Their identity was an expression of who they were. This relates to what I mentioned earlier about NI primaries not being attached to their own perspective. This is a key difference between FI and NI.
I used the trappings of kabuki theater, mime technique, fringe New York music, like my references were Velvet Underground, right. Whatever.
Suffragette City, or
it had that energy value. I wanted that energy value. Yeah, it was a British view of American street energy.
One more thing that comes up briefly in the BBC interview is something that Bowie did in 1997, and that was to sell shares in his catalog. Here's a quote from an article on Billboard.com. The passing of David Bowie brought with it unanimous praise worldwide for the boundary-pushing artist. Easy enough to predict given his stature of one of the world's most well-known and loved artists. Less predictable was the light shed on Bowie's business dealings, which were both savvy and prescient. However, the depth of Bowie's business and financial acumen is far deeper than most realize, according to David Pullman, the person responsible for Bowie bonds, the first instance of a catalog-tied financial instrument on Wall Street. So this made him $55 million in profit, and he retained the rights to his entire catalog. From that same Billboard article, Bowie was savvy from the beginning. His first recording deal recaptured his masters, according to Pullman. When he signed his recording deal, he took less up front and negotiated to get his masters back. What young artist was doing that back then? He was betting that his albums were assets that would be worth more later. So, business savvy, financial innovation, collaboration with Wall Street, that all sounds much more INTJ than ISFP to me. TE is outcome-oriented. FI is not. FI primaries, unless they're going off the rails, will not violate their emotional compass or sense of integrity to achieve an outcome. It doesn't matter how inconvenient something is. It matters that what they do feels right. So sometimes this creates inconvenient situations. You'll find this much more often with ISFPs than you will with INTJs. Case in point, look at Prince and his dealings with the industry. From an article on the BBC. In 1993, Prince announced that he would no longer go by the name Prince, but rather by a love symbol, which was a mashup of the gender symbols for man and woman. It's an unpronounceable symbol whose meaning has not been identified. It's all about thinking in new ways, tuning into a new frequency, he wrote in a statement at the time. The controversial decision was derided as crazy and ridiculous. Record sales declined. It presented all kinds of logistical challenges for the media, resulting in the clumsy title, artist formerly known as Prince. So why are INTJ musicians so often mistyped? To start with, I suspect there are a lot more INTJ artists than most would think. Here's a poll I posted in an INTJ Facebook group. Now, obviously, this needs to be interpreted very loosely. It's a small sample. Some people who responded are probably not actually INTJ, and a lot of people wrote in goofy answers. But with that caveat, 44 people identified as some type of visual artist, 34 identified as musicians, and only 25 identified as not artistic. FI primary types are commonly associated with the arts. I would argue, though, that a surprisingly disproportionate percentage of NI primaries are also artists. I think part of the reason for that is that NI primaries often struggle to express themselves, especially at an early age. NI is very unconscious. INJs might have very strong intuitions that shape their beliefs and their understanding of the world, but they can struggle to explain and defend them consciously. They're also prone to feelings of alienation and can struggle with identity because they shift perspectives so often that it can be difficult for them to know what to hang on to and what to identify with. As a result, they often turn to the arts, where they can slow down time and compose things that say what they can't say verbally, so they can build a sense of confidence and build an identity. One of the things that I think makes INTJ musicians difficult to type is that they're going to show way more FI than INTJs who spend their time and make their money using TE directly. Elon Musk works 100 hours a week, and I suspect he's not spending too much of that time exploring his artistic, emotional side. He's solving logical problems. Therefore, his TE is going to be much easier to detect in his work, and he fits in with most people's perception of an INTJ. But TE is essentially invisible when it comes to music. You're not going to find many signs of TE in a song. You're going to find it behind the scenes, in the artist's approach and thinking. TE is the invisible container that holds space for the expression of the other functions. In the work of an INTJ artist, you're going to see NI, FI, and SE, but TE is going to be the most hidden. You'll need to look at the planning and scheming to see it. In fact, I just had a discussion with my INTJ musician friend John, who I'll introduce you to later in the video. Here's a direct quote from our conversation. "The music and lyrics are art. For me, the career was always separate." INTJs aren't going to write songs about physics and executing strategies. So if you're looking for TE from a musician, look outside the music and how they handle their career and their promotion. Creative artist and international sex symbol don't fit most people's stereotype of INTJ, especially if your examples of INTJs are philosophers, scientists, and entrepreneurs. People like Sam Harris, Carl Sagan, and Tim Ferriss. So what's going on here? How do we get from David Jones, David Bowie's birth name, to Ziggy Stardust? Let's start from the beginning. David Bowie was a smart kid from a working class family in Brixton, England, but he had some difficult emotional issues to deal with, not the least of which was the fact that his family was full of dysfunction and mental illness.
His father was a small, quiet, quite studious man, very gentle, very sweet. I never heard him raise his voice. His mother, she was a little sterner.
I know he loved his father very much, and he was probably closer to his father than to his mother. David also shared a strong bond with his half-brother Terry Burns.
Terry was a real big brother to David. He was a bright guy. They had a lovely symbiotic relationship. Terry was very much his best friend, and he loved him very much.
David idolized his brother. Terry was David's protector and often helped his shy little brother cope with a dark cloud that hung over the Jones family. A number of their mother's relatives suffered from schizophrenia. Some had been institutionalized. Others had committed suicide.
It's been fairly well recorded that my family is pretty rampantly, what's the word? I'm not so sure how much of it is madness. I think that there's an awful lot of emotional and spiritual mutilation goes on in my family.
The specter of mental illness haunted young David and was rarely discussed outside the Jones home. Although he didn't fully understand the ongoing problem, David felt it made him different from other children. In 1956, 9-year-old David lost daily contact with his brother when Terry enlisted in the Royal Air Force. A year later, the Jones family moved to the London suburb of Bromley, where David soon made new friends.
He was always a great thinker and a great worker out of things. And he was a neat, tidy little boy, the kind of boy that Mum likes you to bring home.
The well-behaved youngster quickly fit into the suburban setting and joined a local Boy Scout troop.
As a teenager, he started to get into American rock music, listening to artists like Little Richard and Fats Domino. His older brother was also a big influence on him as a kid. He got him into Jack Kerouac and took him to see jazz and blues bands in London. Then in 1962, he got into a fight with a friend, which had some pretty serious consequences for him.
A crush on a girl named Carol led to a brawl with his best friend.
My fist and his face made contact, should we say. Unfortunately, caused a bit of damage to his eye, and that was not the intention at all.
David was rushed to the hospital, where doctors feared he might lose the sight in his left eye. It took 3 operations to repair the damage. Though surgeons were able to prevent blindness, David's pupil remained permanently dilated. As a result, he appeared to have eyes that were different colors.
Later on, David said to me, I did him a favour. So, a lot of people think it's quite an interesting thing to have 2 different coloured eyes.
The injury kept David out of school for 3 months. And during that time, his feelings of being an outsider became more intense.
I felt often, ever since I was a teenager, so adrift and so not part of everyone else, with so many dark secrets about my family in the cupboard, that it kind of made me feel very much on the outside of everything.
But rather than dwelling on his feelings of alienation, David threw himself even further into music.
In 1967, Bowie released a single called The Laughing Gnome. And if you want to expand your perception of David Bowie, then I recommend checking it out. I'll put a link in the description. He released his first album shortly thereafter. If you haven't heard it, it was nothing like the music that he became famous for. Bowie caught his first big break 2 years later in 1969 with Space Oddity.
David Bowie became the poet of the post-moon landing age, recording his Space Oddity 5 days ahead of the Apollo 11 launch. The album testifies to Bowie's literary influences as he integrated elements of science and dystopian fiction into tracks with philosophical lyrics on peace, love, and morality that were driven by a fusion of acoustic folk and hard rock sounds. The album was an instant commercial success, reaching top 5 in the UK. Space-obsessed years before Star Wars, Bowie prophesized a starman, considered life on Mars, and encouraged us to freak out in a moon-age daydream.
Now, if Bowie's career had ended there, I don't think it would seem too far off from what most people would expect of an INTJ artist. I think it was the invention of Ziggy Stardust where Bowie started to veer off the path of the stereotypical INTJ. To understand how he became Ziggy Stardust, you have to understand the influence of Andy Warhol, and especially his wife, Angie Bowie.
On his first visit to New York, Bowie met Andy Warhol, and he was to draw considerable inspiration from a group of actors associated with the factory.
Will somebody wait for me? Sugar sweet, so easy. Bye.
When I was doing Andy Warhol's Pork in New York, they said Pork was nothing but a bunch of naked freaks running around on stage doing perverted acts, you know. And we were going, yeah, come see the show. Anyway, when Bowie and Angela came to see Pork and she started to meet all the cast of Pork, people were dyeing their hair purple and green. Lee was coloring his hair with magic markers. We wore our fingernail polish out in the clubs. We wore our fingernail polish on the street. We dressed, you know, just as crazy on the street as we did on stage. Angie began to push David in that direction. Without any of that, David would have just continued having long floppy hair and singing folk songs.
Angie is a bold ENTJ Enneagram 8 with a brilliant mind for marketing. She met David in 1968 at a show in London. In a minute, I'm going to play a clip of Angie talking about the early days of Bowie's career, how they ended up together, and how she influenced him. These were two NTJs calculating and crafting an image and a career. Notice how outcome-oriented they were.
But then David decided that I was probably as brilliant as everyone said I was, because Calvin, of course, told him that I had persuaded Lou Reisner to actually allow the contract to be signed, written up by Mercury. And so I guess after that, he started thinking that I was probably more useful on his side than not interested. And that's how he lured me, and he pursued me by the call to come to Beckenham, to see him, to talk about all his shit. It's just like when people meet with an advertising company. He was schmoozing me. I don't take no for an answer. David couldn't get people to agree with him or help him to change things. I did. The thing about it is that the first show or the second show was just so boring. And it really was just as boring as it could be. And the songs were great. So after the show, I said to them, I said, you know, guys, I said, I think it would be totally cool, you know, it really would be cool if we tried to get a little more theatrical. I mean, you know, David, I mean, you worked with Lindsay Camp, you danced with Hermione, you have a good theatrical, and I was making it sound like it was all my fault, so David could stay butch. This was Dumb Angie. Dumb Angie wants the show to look nice. They've got to get all dressed up and have lights, because Dumb Angie is bored with a bunch of musicians, right? Works, good cop, bad cop. David was, you know, well, I don't know, Angie. There's an idea, though, you know, looking at the boys from Yorkshire, and the boys are looking at me, and I'm going, listen, guys, it'll be cool. It'll really be cool. You don't have to wear anything you don't want to. You don't have to dress up any way you don't want to. You have to choose how you want to look. If you don't make the choice, I'll make it for you. I said to Ronno, I said, how about, he always looked beautiful. You know, his shirts, his mom just kept him immaculate. His shirts were starched and perfect, and I knew that's how he liked to look. And I said, well, Ronno, how about a suit? You know, some kind of... Well, I don't want to look ridiculous when everyone else is wearing costumes. I said, well, how about a gold lame suit? Oh, I don't know about that, Angie. That's Elvis, innit? I said, come with me to the shop. I've seen one. It's gold, but it's not lame. It was like tiny, tiny, thin corduroy, but gold. I mean, shiny gold. Ronno loved it. Ooh, I look fabulous in this.
I thought it was really important to break down the differences in gender. If you could break down the differences in gender on stage so that everybody, the gay people in nightclubs, everybody would come out and dance and would love it. And we were lucky, because the breadth of David's imagination and the scope of what the band played meant that we were able to grab enormous quantities of people to come and see the show. We were able to get our marketing base a lot expanded, if you get my drift.
No, and I don't think England was shocked. It was just everyone was shocked because no one was talking about it. So you would go to the Sombrero where, you know, it wasn't even a gay club, but there were lots of gay people there. You go across the street to the Gates. There was plenty of all of this excitement going on, you know, in our cities where it was a little hipper, but no one talked about it.
Ziggy Stardust wasn't a character born out of FI. It wasn't someone Bowie had inside of him that he had to get out, as much as it was the product of an eclectic mix of influences designed to create an effective image. Now, I happen to be good friends with someone who I think makes a great case study to help illustrate a lot of what I'm talking about here. This is John Oszajca. John is the first person I called after I watched that interview from the beginning of this video. John is a great example of an INTJ musician. I'm going to show some highlights of his career and show how he applied NI and TE to create and leverage opportunities to the point that he literally went from broke musician to millionaire major record label artist overnight. I'm going to paint a picture of him as a clear INTJ first, and then I'm going to show you some things that will hopefully expand your perception of the type and help you draw connections to Bowie as an INTJ. John gave me permission to use some clips from his yet unreleased documentary called From There to Here, in which he tells the story of how he went from having holes in his shoes to signing what was at the time the largest record deal for a new artist in history according to industry sources. I'm going to play some of those clips in this section. If you want to learn more about John and be notified when the full video is released, you can sign up for his mailing list at johnoszajca.com. You'll want to see it. It's a fascinating case study full of creativity, debauchery, strategy, and drama. But first, here's John on the Kath Vincent show in New Zealand. It's pretty easy to see his INTJ traits on display in this video. INTJs are, of course, known for their abilities to understand systems, create and execute formulas and strategies, make money, and innovate.
On the show tonight, rock legend turned internet marketer John Oszajca talks openly on making music, making money, and making it happen.
No, I mean, it was great for a second. It looked like I was set to be the next big thing, and I had a great experience. I got paid quite well from the initial record deal and publishing deal.
So, how much are we talking? What kind of record deal are we talking?
It was in the ballpark of $2.2 million.
Right. Okay. So a lot of musicians would call that success if they got to that.
Yeah, no, on the financial level, it was successful.
Yeah. Right. Then what action did you take?
I had started exploring other ways to make money because the writing was on the wall, and if the bank account didn't turn around, I was going to need to get a job. And
wow! Stop!
I did not want to do that, nor did I have the skills to do so.
You don't have the haircut for a job, really.
Exactly. That was my argument. So one day I'm sitting there on the computer, and I've been wondering about this whole make money online thing that everybody sees everywhere, and that seemed perfect. I could be autonomous, and one night I sprang for a course. I spent, I think, $200 on a course that promised to make me millions of dollars, little to no effort while I was sleeping. So I buy the course. I sit up all night. I spend, I think, $10 on advertising. It was a paid advertising-based strategy, so I got kind of quick results. And lo and behold, I woke up and I sold a $20 ebook, and I was hooked. I was convinced that where I can make, so one $20 ebook or whatever the product might be, there was more money to be made.
So you spent $10 and you made 20.
Yes.
Cool. Doubled your money. I like it.
But after about a year, I had sort of cracked the code, so to speak, on what it means to run a successful online business, and I built an e-commerce business that sold. It's over $2 million at this point. I'm not exactly sure where it's at right now, but over $2 million in sales. Wow, and that was just the first initial business. Like I said, nothing to do with music just yet. Yeah. It was just trying to get the finances in order.
Okay, well done. You obviously did that.
Yeah.
And then, so once you'd taken that, learning that concept, then what happened after that?
So as you do, particularly when you're working online, you're always looking for new angles, new projects, and it only kind of made sense. I was, as I say, still making music, and I thought maybe, what if some of this stuff I'm learning about marketing could be used to sell music? And I would use myself as a guinea pig and run little promotions and tests, and lo and behold, I sold records. I could send out an email and wake up and there'd be $300 in album sales in my inbox, and that was something that in all of my time, whether on the labels or prior to that as an independent artist, I had never been able to do. Other than playing a show and standing there at the merch table, I did not know, and I don't know anyone who did, I did not know any action that I could take that resulted in sales. And so you feel very vulnerable. You need a manager, you need a lawyer, you need a record label. And for the first time, I didn't, and it was really, really exciting.
What's the ingredient? What is it about you that could make a $2 million business out of thin air?
What is it about me? I don't know. I think there's a couple of different ingredients. One is just the willingness to stick at it and work, of course, but another, I suppose on a more strategic level, realizing how kind of the world works and how human beings work, and how there's really a simple process behind most of success, at least with business. It's finding a market and creating something that market wants, and then figuring out where that market is and getting your message in front of them, and really focusing on sales. At least that's been my approach, as opposed to, again, what as a musician I think I did most of my career, which is just coming up with a great idea and waiting for the world to find it. Sales is a process. As long as you do have a good product and you take care of people, I think good customer support, especially online, is a big part of it. And it really isn't that difficult.
Yeah. It sounds, I remember you saying just a little earlier, I obsessed about direct marketing, and that was the term you used. Is there something about just digging in? Is there some personal attribute that people need?
Well, I heard Gary Vaynerchuk, he's a business author, and I'm a big fan of what he's all about, but he, in his book, Crush It, I think it was, and I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but talked about having the entrepreneurial spirit in your DNA, and some people have it and some people don't, but I think there may be something to that. Some people get extremely, a spark goes off, they get obsessed, and won't let up until they've accomplished what they are out to accomplish.
Well, I think that's great advice for all of us. Don't let up until you've accomplished what you set out to.
Yeah, and it helps if you have a roadmap along the way. You'll get there far more often if you do.
Yeah, brilliant, John. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
In the 90s, John moved from Seattle to Hollywood, and one of his first gigs was to be a club promoter. Naturally, John saw this as an opportunity. He built up a lot of goodwill by pulling strings to help people book gigs and get into shows. Over time, he built a strong network of people who would ultimately return the favor when the time came. He ended up getting a single on the air on K-Rock, the top rock station in LA. His manager's phone started ringing off the hook, and he started getting offers for a record deal. At that point, John decided to book a show that would serve as a showcase for record labels. It was a risky move because he had already had offers on the table. John saw it as a huge opportunity, though, and he got on the phone and started calling everyone in his network.
I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, where do you draw the line, of being safe and being and going and really just going for it and trying to make cool art, Please come to my show tomorrow night. Guest list tomorrow. Anyone you want. Thursday, Dragonfly, 9:30. Bye. Hey, Kevin, how you doing? What's going on? Let me clear the other line, okay? I'm playing tomorrow night, Thursday at the Dragonfly, going at 9:30. Playing tomorrow night at the Dragonfly, 9:30, Dragonfly. It's really hard to say the same thing over and over. Cool, I'm gonna jump, I got 1,000 phone calls to make, but I'll see you tomorrow night. The package right now that we're asking for is like 3 figures, you know what I mean? I mean 7 figures. Yeah, Tony O'Neill +1. Just give me a call and leave a message, consider it confirmed, I'll take care of it. Everyone and anyone on the list, I'm trying to fill the place up. Hope all's well, talk to you soon, bye. Got to get more calls in. It's a really big show. Record labels, and I'm on the radio. In USA Today, I'm fucking not dressed. Hey, Apollo, this is the big one. If I were Babe Ruth, I would say I am not gonna be unsigned by next week. I got literally, this is totally coming from excitement. I'm certainly not trying to sound obnoxious, but I got 7 offers on the table right now. I was flown to New York last week. Because the song got on the radio, and it's taken off at like half a dozen stations already across the country. So this is really, really looking good, and I hadn't signed a deal yet. So all of a sudden, everybody, is interested.
This is how TE works in music. It's not in the music, it's in the strategy. It's in reverse engineering direction and planning from a visualized outcome. John has told me that when he made an album, he visualized the finished product from the beginning. He saw the CD in someone's hand and how they would experience it. He wanted to create that experience in his mind first, and then he went to work. So going back to the story, the result of John's thinking ahead, combined with his hustle, resulted in the show being sold out to the point that a number of celebrities and A&R reps couldn't even get in.
How's the line get outside? It's doing quite well.
The show was totally sold out. In terms of his fan base, it was totally there. In terms of the industry, it was an absolute, as we would call it in our business, a weasel fest. Every A&R person, every president of every label, it was just packed to the rafters.
Giant Records alone had 20 people on the guest list. It was so packed, I almost didn't get into the show.
I can't get into the show.
Yeah, I'll take care of these guys. I just signed Ricky. And
Can you get Dave?
My manager guy? Yeah, if I see him. So I concerted my effort to go find him.
That'd be great. I need him.
It's going to be great. It's a Dave's guitars and stuff.
I can. Can you get Dave?
Yeah, well.
All the major record labels were there to see this, and the show set off a bidding war that ended with him signing a huge deal with Interscope Records. Ultimately, John got dropped from the label, but he wisely invested a chunk of the money from the record deal to buy courses in online marketing. He then went on to make millions as a marketer, and now he teaches what he's learned to other musicians. Now, this should all sound congruent with most people's perception of INTJ. So let's talk about the part of his career that probably doesn't. One of the first people John met in LA was a guy named Rick Royale. Rick, like Angie Bowie, is an ENTJ. ENTJs and INTJs are both strategists, but that doesn't mean that they'll only apply strategy in the realms of finance or engineering. They can, and many do, apply strategy to their own art. Like Angie with David, Rick pushed John to get out of his comfort zone and try some things that he wasn't readily comfortable with.
John at the time was very conservative. Maybe it just was a point in his life where he really wanted to break out of the shell that he had created for himself. He'd seen me wear makeup before. It kind of freaked him out, putting on eyeliner and let alone lipstick. And we were meeting a couple of gals at the spaghetti factory. But this night we just decided we'll go and drag. We'll go just to see, the response. The end result was it changed John's perspective on life more than it actually shocked the girls we went to shock. But it definitely was the first time that John, crossed that line.
One night, the owner of a new club called Goldfingers approached Rick, who had had success in a previous band called Rattled Roosters, about doing a residency there. On the spot, he made up a story about him and John having an amazing new band and BS'd his way into the gig, which was to start 2 weeks later. So John and Rick dreamed up this vision of a sort of performance art concept band they called Popism. The idea was to see how far they could get by constructing a band that looked the part, talked a big game, and displayed all the social signals of being great without actually having the talent or the rehearsal time to back it up.
Pure, unadulterated pop with no skill or technique and just something to throw at people, and that's where Popism came from.
The Rattled Roosters had played a show at a new bar at the time called Goldfingers. The owner had approached me and said, would you like to do a residence here? We'd kind of sold her on this idea that didn't exist. And we went home that night, John and I planned the whole thing, who we wanted involved, wrote a bunch of songs, and basically within 2 weeks, I believe, we just put the whole thing together.
And one night, John and Rick came up to me and they said, we're putting this thing together starting tomorrow. Do you want to come? I said, all right. We had one rehearsal, and we rehearsed like 4 songs, and I think we played the next night.
Conceptually, the band was horrible. That was the idea, that this was a band that could hardly play. I mean, we intentionally played instruments that weren't our instruments. Billy was the only guy who actually played piano.
On keyboards, we have Billy Cool, to my right. On lead guitar, we have the fabulous Rick Royale! Woo! Thank you!
John, I don't think had ever played drums before, and our bass player just couldn't play,
On bass, we have the lovely Mish.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Gay Johnny, the sexually ambiguous heroin addict who is often seen drinking vodka straight from the bottle while dancing on the bar.
Gay Johnny, let's give it up!
Gay Johnny was a handle that was either placed upon John or made up himself, and he didn't want to admit that he made it up because he was afraid of it.
The guy with a martini glass kind of slopping around, and always having sort of a half-baked smile, kind of a wishful rock star.
In boa and makeup, he already was a freak. So he felt much more comfortable approaching people, and people were approaching him because he looked so outrageous.
And so Gay Johnny gave him a mask to hide behind while he was doing this popism thing. He enjoyed the flamboyance.
In reality, John's a straight guy, married with children, doesn't do drugs, and the vodka he was drinking was actually water. But I hope Gay Johnny has helped expand your perspective on the INTJ type and helped you see how it's possible that an INTJ could go from David Jones to Ziggy Stardust. David Bowie wasn't moving through the world following his emotions from moment to moment. He was a strategist, and his true genius lied in his ability to manipulate perspective and pull together eclectic pieces to form new creations. From timing the release of Space Oddity to coincide with the moon landing, to creating a character that possessed the imagination of millions, to selling Bowie bonds, and ultimately to releasing his final album to coincide with his death, Bowie was a calculator and a planner. Our image of INTJ might be something like this, but INTJs can sometimes look like this, and this, and this. Bowie didn't fit the stereotype for INTJ, and this to me is where personality type becomes interesting. Anomalies are exciting because when we come to understand them, they expand our horizons. We learn something. We're closer to understanding the actual truth of reality. David Bowie was an INTJ, but more importantly, he was a one-of-a-kind, original human being. Okay, so that wraps it up. If you'd like to dig in more and do some more research on David Bowie, I've posted a bunch of links to some really great videos that I've found in researching for this video. Let me know what you think about this. If the video gets a good response, I'll make more like it. So if you like it, let me know. Like the video, post a comment, subscribe, etc. If you have any requests for me to profile other musicians like I did with Bowie, then let me know. I'm specifically looking for artists that are well known, that a lot of people are interested in, and where hopefully there's some controversy about their type. Leave your request here in the comment section and I will read all of them. If you'd like me to analyze your personality, you can go to intuitivemusician.com/mytype. If you'd like some more tips on how to tell what personality type other people are, you can go to intuitivemusician.com/tips. And if you're an intuitive musician yourself, then I invite you to join us in the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/intuitivemusicians. And if you're a musician and you're not sure if you're an intuitive or what that means, you can go to intuitivemusician.com/test to find out. So that's it. At this point, I'd like to encourage you to go out and listen to some David Bowie. Think about some of the things that I said, but most of all, just enjoy him for the fantastic artist that he was. That's all for now. Cheers.